So it's been a while since I've done one of these discussion videos, mainly because I couldn't think of a topic to discuss for a while that deserved its own dedicated video. But there's been a trend I've noticed in the gaming community, specifically from people who play Soulsborne games who try to, for lack of a better word, project their ideas of what an action game should be onto different genres of games. And when it doesn't challenge them in the same way, they give a shitty opinion to explain why they think it sucks, and revert back to playing Dark Souls for the 800 billionth time. Now, if you read the title of this video thinking that I'm gonna go all Jim Sterling or Quantum TV on you, and just ignorantly bash Soulsborne games because I want the whole world to think like me, it's not what I'm here to do. I also think it's important to point out, and I know I'm knocking on hard wood here, that I've never beaten a Soulsborne game before. The farthest I ever gotten in any of them was Elden Ring, and I mostly just ran around and got lost because I'm one of those people who gets stumped pretty easily on obtuse puzzles or abstract navigation in gaming. It's part of the reason why I can never get into those classic point-and-click games like Monkey Island or King's Quest, unless they ease me enough into them, which they never did. That's not me saying those genres suck, and I wouldn't use that as a criticism towards a point-and-click adventure game if I were to review one. This is just me admitting my own personal bias here. But despite my annoyances with them, I get why the Soulsborne games have been so popular over the last decade. It's thanks to them that we see a lot more challenge in gaming nowadays. Whereas back in the 360 and PS3 era, too many games were stuck in a rut of being too forgiving. Even in the more respected series from that era of consoles like BioShock, Assassin's Creed, and Uncharted, if you made a mistake, it would just hold your hand all the way through, letting you die forever and ever without punishing you at all other than throwing you back to your last checkpoint or autosave. You're also probably wondering about what I mean by cocaine for elitists and how it can apply to an entire genre of games. Well, cocaine is an addictive substance that raises your dopamine levels, aka the chemicals in your brain that determine the pleasure or rewarding feeling you get for accomplishing something, to the point where the things you used to enjoy no longer matter, and you can't imagine doing anything without cocaine being involved in some way, much to the annoyance of everyone around you. Normally for this type of behavior I would call it fanboyism, but the difference between a fanboy and an elitist is that fanboys are making their claims from a more defensive standpoint, right? I mean, it's way more difficult to call someone a fanboy of something if a game or a series they like isn't at least a popular topic among the general gaming community, and being overhyped to shit. Behind all the genuine love and praise that these Soulsborne games get hides a more discreet flavor of irrational thinking, because the fans of these games in general don't really need to be defensive about them. Instead, what some of the fans will do is be on the offensive and project what they think action games in general should be as they get released, because of how enlightened they've become. Since they're already in the mindset of Soulsborne games in general being undisputed masterpieces, anyone who says they don't enjoy them or that they would enjoy them if only gets written off as if they were normies. Unless the title in question is something that everyone from their own little union collectively criticizes, like Dark Souls 2 or Code Vein. And if you don't believe me, just go on any random person's Dark Souls stream and talk about why Dark Souls 2 is the best game of the franchise and watch the smugness commence. It's beautiful. There's enough Soulsborne fanatics I've come across who treat those games as like their personal peak when it comes to gameplay. Nothing can ever top it, and they might even look back at some of the games they used to enjoy from various other genres with completely different design philosophies, and fantasize about how much better they would be if they borrowed mechanics from Bloodborne or something. Like, for example, I was perusing the Black Myth Wukong discussions tab on Steam, and I saw one thread where a guy was saying he just couldn't enjoy the game because he's been spoiled by Elden Ring, and how you progress in Wukong just feels so minuscule and brain dead. I understand that he's entitled to his own opinion, but bro, are we at the point where RPG elements or even just the design philosophies of RPGs in general are considered bad or lazy? Or is it possible that this is just a you thing and you should acknowledge that Black Myth Wukong isn't trying to be like Elden Ring? Sure, it has a similar combat style, but how it's handled is meant to be more like a hack and slash with RPG elements. Sort of like the new God of War games, or even dare I say Kingdom Hearts or a Devil May Cry, where the goal is more about unlocking new skills and equipment that become super effective against an upcoming boss, and maxing out your stats however you want. But before I continue, I really want to reiterate that the type of person I'm describing right now isn't most Soulsborne fans. Because if you just genuinely enjoy them and don't try to act all snarky about it towards other people for liking other action-based games more, it shouldn't exactly matter if those are the only games you play, right? Like, there's a fine line between only playing Soulsborne titles because you just don't enjoy playing anything else, and it scratches the itch that other games can't, versus using the Soulsborne games as a lens of which to criticize other genres and act like they're incompetently designed because, for example, you think having a map in a Metroidvania game makes it brain dead because the only reason why you'd need one is that most of the rooms all blend in together, and you wouldn't know where to go unless you've played each title a billion times. Yeah, that's actually something I heard someone say when he was streaming Castlevania Aria of Sorrow on Twitch. And for the record, I'm not going to say who the streamer was because I don't feel like farming other people for the sake of algorithm points. If he wants to make himself known for nitpicking a franchise that's beloved by many in an ignorant way, like how Egoraptor does whenever he let's plays a Sonic game, that's his choice. I just feel like using him as an example because of his smug attitude and comparing it to Resident Evil 2 Remake and Dark Souls, saying the enemies and resource management in Aria of Sorrow should be more like that, despite the fact that these games are all completely unrelated. Like, excuse me for my ignorance, but don't you think it's possible for games to incorporate maze-like designs, map completion, as well as upgrades and backtracking as a way to challenge players? Do you really need every basic bitch-ass skeleton, zombie, or bat enemy sprite to have all these complex animation telegraphs and kill you in one hit if you make one wrong move to make you feel like you accomplished something, in a game where you need to explore as much of the map as possible in order to progress? I'm sure for some of you guys, the indie game Blasphemous might have popped into your heads, but that game isn't so much a Metroidvania game as it is a roguelite Metroidvania hybrid. It's like comparing Dr. Pepper to Dr. Pepper Vanilla. Some people like the added vanilla, some don't like it, and some prefer both depending on what their mood is. That's why freestyle soda dispensers have a selection menu. So while we're on the topic of Castlevania, this next example I want to bring up isn't really coming from any kind of hate-dom, but rather within the Castlevania fandom itself. So I followed a lot of gaming-related channels on YouTube over the years, and I swear to God, the older fans who grew up with these games during the NES era and got into Soulsborne games in their 30s and 40s will say that all Konami needs to do to reboot this series is just take the level design of Bloodborne, get rid of all the anime influences, make it look medieval and photorealistic, but slap a Castlevania skin on it and it'll be an instant hit. Every time I hear that from someone, I'm like, no, that would be a horrible idea. Although I kind of understand where they're coming from. If my first experience with the Castlevania series was walking into an electronics store in 1987 and buying Castlevania 1 with the only context of what I bought being 8-bit sprites that left a lot to the imagination, and box art that had a Conan the Barbarian looking dude, before the series had its own unique identity, and would take on a more anime aesthetic as later consoles would allow, I'd probably want a potential reboot of the Castlevania series looking like Souls of Thrones as well. But people enjoy the Castlevania games and Bloodborne for two completely different reasons. Sure, the 8-bit and 16-bit Castlevania games were quite difficult, and relied on rigid enemy patterns that you had to master if you wanted to beat them, but the thing that helped me enjoy playing them was that they were extremely linear and only had like 7 levels per title. Convert these games into a semi-open 3D environment with photorealism, and all the things that people like about classic Castlevania becomes lost in translation. Same thing goes with the Metroidvania titles too. It's extremely easy to cheese through a good chunk of the bosses from Symphony of the Night or Aria of Sorrow if you know where to go, what equipment to find, what area to farm gold in, what items to pick up, and what level you need to be. But like any game that heavily relies on RPG mechanics, the game doesn't punish you for playing in the same way that a Soulsborne title does. You can level up all you want in Bloodborne or Dark Souls and farm items till you're blue in the face, but if you don't fight bosses in the way that the developers intended, you'll just keep dying over and over again. Whereas in a Metroidvania title like Aria of Sorrow, being overleveled is a completely viable option to get through the game and explore everything it has to offer. It's not the only way, but I find it fun in action RPGs to exploit bosses in different ways, and we all have our own little methods. See this? This is a save file of my last Aria of Sorrow playthrough, where Soma is at level 100. You don't have to be at level 100 in order to beat the game or anything, but I like maxing out everything in any game anytime I get the opportunity. And the killer mantle enemies in the arena gave me just enough experience per kill to where I felt like I could grind outside of a save point for 8 or 9 hours and put on a podcast or 3. Again, nowhere in the game does it encourage you to play it this way, and some might say that this is serial killer behavior, but guess what? I don't care. I got about as much satisfaction from leveling up over and over again from grinding out a single enemy in Castlevania Aria of Sorrow as I did dying 50 times in a row to that sand rat looking asshole at the end of Chapter 2 in Black Myth Wukong. And who knows, maybe after I beat Black Myth Wukong, it'll brainwash me into beating Dark Souls someday, since it shares the same core gameplay as your typical Souls-like, but handles itself differently. For now, all I can tell you is I enjoy the Metroidvania-styled Castlevania entries for giving me the freedom of being able to max out my character and cheese through bosses located between maze-like areas with different themes to focus more on map completion or finding hidden areas if I so choose. That doesn't mean the games that do this are bad. It just means that there's other aspects to appreciate about Metroidvanias that Soulsborne fans don't necessarily care about. If you're playing a Metroidvania game purely for the combat, you're playing them for the wrong reasons. So all in all, I respect the Soulsborne games. I respect the people who enjoy playing them, and I even respect the fans of the series who only play those games and disregard everything else. But what I can't respect are the fans who have an elitist smug attitude towards other action games in an irrational way. And please, for the love of God, don't Soulsborne my Castlevania. I'm enjoying my time blitzing through the Castlevania Dominus collection on Steam, and I don't want Konami to potentially reboot this series again in a way that doesn't feel like a proper evolution of the classics or the Metroidvania games. The last time Konami tried rebooting this franchise, we ended up with Devil May War of the Colossus, Drake's Deception, and it sucked 5-layered dick. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.